So I was 10 years old when this account happened, in the fall of grade 5. My mother, sister and I were visiting my aunt and uncle and their 2 sons in Kansas while on break from school. My family is from South Korea, but my father is African American, so we grew up in both cultures and speak English fluently, so it wasn't hard traveling and interacting with others. My aunt is a devoted Christian and really loved bringing us to church with her and a family friend named Sandra. Now, I'm not against going to church, but I don't believe in a set God, so don't attack me. I do, however, believe in a higher power and spent a good portion of my time at a Buddhist temple, where my maternal grandfather is one of the head monks and tomb keepers. So, despite being more spiritually inclined, I would get up early and put on my Sunday best and would stumble out the door, jet-lagged, to make it to the service on time. The services always started normally: greet thy neighbours, welcome the guests, singing, and eventually the preacher would come out and read through the scriptures. There were times prayers for those in the community would happen, or people coming forward to be saved in the form of baptism. My family normally sat in what my aunt called the best pew in the house, but we didn't sit in the pew alone. You see, there was this man that sat between our family and another family of 3, and this man between the families was actually a killer. A killer in the pews. Now, I know you're probably thinking, how do you know he was a killer, right? Well, hold on and I'll tell you about it. So the man that sat on the other side of my mother and next to Mr. Hopper was considered an outstanding member of the community. He was active in church, and his kids even used to babysit around the community. All in all, he seemed just like the typical kind of American family man. But he was odd though. Something about his mannerisms just threw my family for a loop. Because this man used to lean over toward my mother to the point that his head was almost on her shoulder, and he would take a deep inhale. And my mother would lean away towards me, almost crushing me, and promptly would ask the man, "Can I help you with something?" He smiled and just laughed a bit and shook his head no just a bit and muttered an apology for making us uncomfortable. He started with, "Oh, sorry, you just smell familiar. It makes me remember something. It triggers a deep memory in me or something." My mum had just laughed it off rather uncomfortably and stated that it's Sea Island cotton from Bath and Body Works. This has been my mum's favourite scent ever since I can remember. It's kind of like her signature. And if you've ever smelled it, you would know just how fresh and clean the perfume is, so maybe he was just drawn in a subconsciously kind of closer way, like a moth to a flame or something. But as time progressed and service after service passed, he continued his sniffing ministrations. My mum had eventually had enough, and this man was creepy and couldn't take the hint to just back off. Well, we jumped ship at this point and moved pews the next service to an area more towards the back. But that should have been the end of it, right? But it wasn't. The man must have thought man overboard, because he jumped ship and maneuvered through the worshippers to, you guessed it, right back next to us. This cycle continued as well up until we just boarded our plane to go home. However, the story doesn't end here. Now, remember how I mentioned the family friend Sandra? Well, Sandra was a dental hygienist in Kansas, and she had a neighbor who was also one of her patients, and she allegedly got found murdered in her own home. I won't be disclosing her name out of respect of her family and friends, but this woman, may she rest in peace, because her body was found bound with a rope and a plastic bag over her head. It was apparent pretty quickly that she had been tortured brutally before she passed. Not long after the discovery, another body was discovered in yet again their own home, and mocking letters started being sent into the local PD station. If you haven't figured it out yet, then yes, this was the work of the serial killer BTK, which stands for Bind, Torture, and Kill. He was allegedly back after years of silence. Initially, police thought it maybe was just a copycat killer since BTK had been quiet for so long. They assumed that he had died or moved away among other possibilities. The killings continued though for a bit longer, and from what I remember, my aunt and uncle were on edge. The whole community was. BTK though was eventually caught, and I can't tell you all the details regarding that since I was back home in Korea, but I can tell you that we received a terrifying phone call not long after. My aunt and Sandra called to inform us that it was over. The BTK was caught. great news, right? We should have slept easy knowing that our friends and family were safe, but they were no longer prey. But BTK wasn't just a serial killer. He was the man from the pews, the one that sniffed my mother consistently. He was Dennis Rader. The thing that scares me the most, though, my mum could have definitely been on his list. She could have been a victim, all because we sat in the pews and greeted our neighbour with brotherly love. I met Lucy for the first time when she fell asleep on my arm on the bus. When she woke up, she gave me a really weird look before just shambling off the bus. I figured that she was weirded out that I didn't wake her sooner, so I kicked myself for being a creep and just went on with my day. I mean, can't win 'em all, right? But I was thrown for a hell of a loop when her whole friend group was sitting by my usual spot on the bus the next day. Being an awkward teen, I wasn't about to turn down any kind of positive attention. I got to know her friends and ended up on good terms with her before I realized that I hadn't even asked her name. I'm hard of hearing, so I didn't hear her when she said her name. "Lucy, right?" I asked, and she said yeah. Lucy and I had your typical high school courting process. That is to say that she was overwhelmingly forward, and after a few weeks I got the hint. As we were getting close, Lucy would fixate on learning about past heartbreaks and finding out about my personal life. I'm a serial oversharer, guilty as charged, so I didn't really mind talking about myself, but she would constantly butt in by saying how fucked up things were and that she kicked my friend's ass for hurting me like that. I was honestly a bit weirded out by this. Even at 16, I knew that that was pretty cringy, and I was even going through my emo phase at the time, which is saying something. The thing that really bugged me at the time, though, was that she'd ask so much about me, but she would never say anything about herself. It made me feel kind of shitty, always venting and never helping her out. During this time, she missed a few days, and I let another girl sit by me since it was an overcrowded bus and I didn't think it mattered. When Lucy came back and saw me with another girl, you'd think that she was shot. She just about ran to the seat behind us and started going off. I can't remember exactly what she said, but the other girl never talked to me again after that. But once her rival was gone, Lucy reclaimed her spot next to me and was all sunshine and rainbows. And nobody ever asked to sit in Lucy's spot after that. Lucy always had a crude sense of humor, but after a while, things started getting kind of hurtful. She would take jabs at my insecurities, and anytime I got upset about it, she would just give me shit for not being able to take a joke. These jokes usually stopped just shy of outright insulting me as well. When Lucy was breaking me down, she was super affectionate. She would sleep on my chest while we rode home on the bus, and she'd even talk about herself from time to time. I don't remember the first time that she hit me. It seems like something that should be burned into my memory, some kind of a cinematic moment in my life. But honestly, it all just kind of blended together after a while. I know it started off small though, flicking me and playful slapping. By the end of it, she would elbow me in the ribs for telling a bad joke. It didn't register as anything abusive. That is, until she slammed me into a wall while we were walking through the hallway after class. I told a shitty joke and she shoved me hard into the wall. She laughed because of the sound that I made before shoving me again. People were going through the halls with us, but they didn't do anything. Sometimes I wonder what they even thought of me. I didn't bump her after the hallway incident, but I did start standing up for myself. We started getting into a lot of fights after that. Of course, they only ever ended in one of two ways. She was right or it was an honest mistake. I tried to break things off a few times around that time, but every single time I did, she had a new sob story that I hadn't heard before that made her actions totally understandable. I let it get in my head that she was some tragic soul and that I could help her. I convinced myself that there was something noble about taking the abuse, and nobody I knew tried to step in and stop me. I finally got the nerve to dump her, though, after 3 major things happened within a 3-week span. First, I found out that she was taking pictures of me while I wasn't looking and posting them online. The weird thing was that I only found out because she showed me. It felt gross seeing a bunch of nearly identical pictures of me not facing the camera. The way she showed me was worse, though. She seemed almost excited, like I'd be happy that she was invading my privacy. The second weird thing happened when I tried to wake her on the bus. After about a half an hour on my chest, not saying anything, I nudged her shoulder since we were at our stop and she has to get up, and she just looked me in the eye and told me that she wasn't asleep. Combined with the pictures, this seemed really weird to me. She didn't try to be cute or romantic about it or anything, just I pretend to be asleep on you sometimes. And I was kind of like, what the hell? The breaking point, though, came when she was showing off some award that she got from school. There was something off about the award. It didn't have a name on it. But then I found out that it did actually have a name. It even had a picture of her smiling on it. The problem was, it wasn't addressed to a Lucy. You can't imagine what I felt when I found out that I didn't even know my girlfriend's name. A few days later, we got into our usual fights and I broke things off. Lucy always was the persistent type, though. She would sit a few rows behind me on the bus and stare at me while I went to my car after getting off the bus. Looking at her wouldn't make her stop either. It felt like she wanted me to know that she was watching me. But one day, when she got on the bus, though, she looked me right in the eyes for a solid 20 seconds while she walked past me to her seat. I'm pretty sure that she was expecting me to say something to her, but I never did. The next year I graduated and I got a retail job, and end of story, right? I thought so too. It was the start of Christmas season and I was working cashier that night. Lucy came into the store that I was working at, random chance. It had been a year and a half since we broke up at this point, so I wasn't happy to see her, but surely we could pretend that it wasn't weird. She gave me the look, though, that the squirrel in Ice Age gives his nut. She grabbed something from the front and went right into my lane. She didn't say a word to me, but she just wouldn't break eye contact, and she was swaying like an excited toddler. It honestly kind of hurt to look at her, and I just rang her up silently and waited for her to leave. Then I looked at the other cashier for support, and he told me that she was giving him weird vibes. And it was at this point that I got this really bad gut feeling after she left. Lucy soon became a regular at our little shop. She would come in and creep out my co-workers. Lucy never really tried to hide what she was doing. One of the cashiers mentioned how often she came in while ringing her out, and she said that she was visiting me. She never said my name, but she always just described me. After that, whenever she showed up, someone would make a note of it on the radio, as she was usually in one of the areas bordering my workspace. I heard about her a lot more than I saw her, so I think she was hiding from me. She never got banned from the store despite complaints because, well, the managers were penny-pinching assholes who would sell any one of us out to get sales up. I know Lucy was responsible for at least one resignation from my workplace. Someone who looked like me caught her staring a few times and heard how often she came in, and after a while the stress just wasn't worth minimum wage anymore. The last time I saw Lucy, though, at the store was a little over a year ago now. I was hanging out with one of the girls in the back while we were loading up carts with stuff that we had to stock. We were right by the back entrance, so you could see right in front of the store proper. I left to put up the stuff in my cart, and when I came back, I saw her. She was standing about 40 feet from the back entrance, just still as a statue. I kind of froze when I saw her, and I watched her stare into the back for what felt like hours before she just suddenly turned and walked briskly away. The girl I was talking to was still in the back when I got back, and she was a lot more awkward after that. And the girl quit 3 days later and just about crushed my ribs when she hugged me goodbye. She hated her job, so I'd like to think that it didn't have anything to do with Lucy, but I don't know. I personally left the store not too long after that as well and got a job that didn't involve customer service. But unfortunately, that wasn't the last time that I saw her. Over the summer, after taking my new job, I had a bit of a mental breakdown. I convinced myself that I was unlovable and that Lucy was the only person that I could possibly be with. I left the house without any conceivable plan to find her, and with stars in the sky, lit by street lamps, I saw her. She was with another girl now, and I got so close I could almost touch her before I snapped to my senses. I thought about her stalking me at the store, and I realized that I was kind of becoming her. So I just ran home and I cried that night. The last time I saw Lucy was last week, though. I was walking home from work and decided to stop for dinner. I thought that I saw her in line, but convinced myself that it was someone else. I ordered and I sat down to eat. I was looking out the window while I ate, and she took the table between me and the window that I was looking out of. She was actually with some guy that looked vaguely familiar, maybe a school friend. She was sat at an angle, so she was half looking at him, and every few seconds, she would look right at me. I knew that it was her. I mean, she changed her hair. It looks an awful lot like mine now, in fact, and after I finished, I went to the bathroom because I felt sick. After washing my hands, I looked into the mirror, and I felt like I could die, because it hadn't occurred to me before, but I was wearing my work uniform, complete with company name on my hat in big letters. She was reading my hat. Lucy hasn't been to my current job yet, but I'm sure that she'll turn up eventually. I'm moving soon, so I'm just hoping that I'm not here anymore when Lucy turns up. Lucy has been a part of my life for the past 4 years. We dated for 4 months in high school, and she just keeps turning up. I mean, I wasn't a paragon of mental health before I met her, I admit, but I feel like she broke me as a person, and I'll never forgive her for what she did to me. Since her abuse and her stalking, I've developed serious trust issues, get painfully nervous leaving my house, and people who show interest in me immediately put me on edge. I've tried to date since everything happened, but I just can't do it. I'm just too much work at this point, so I've decided that I'll just stay single until I can work through my issues. I hope I don't see Lucy again, but somehow I don't think that that's possible. This took place when I was 19 years old. My family was moving to a new house and I was moving out of state. I had stayed a week longer to help my family get everything moved to the new house before I left. We lived in a pretty poor neighborhood, the ghetto honestly. We were used to shady encounters and creepy crackheads around the area, unfortunately. My mother was moving from this area into a very rural country area as she didn't want to raise my brothers in a dangerous neighborhood anymore. And it was July, and we had spent a good 2 weeks loading trucks, throwing things out, moving furniture, and just generally cleaning the house. We had U-Haul trucks and family friends trucks loaded with our furniture on our dead-end road pretty much all week back and forth. The last couple of days of moving everything to the new house, my mum and brothers began sleeping at their new home. I wasn't too thrilled about the lack of Wi-Fi at the new house, and seeing as it was in the boonies, the cell connection was awful. At the time, my boyfriend and I were long distance, so my cell phone was my only means of connection to him, and I felt the need to be in contact with him pretty much all day. I also was having a hard time with leaving a house that contained so many memories. But that was a mistake. I begged my mum to let me stay alone at the old house as the Wi-Fi was still up and my bed was still there. I told her that I wasn't ready to leave yet. I could finish cleaning it up so she didn't have to. I wasn't comfortable at the new house, etc., etc. Every argument in the book, basically. My mum was hesitant, obviously, and said no multiple times. She hated the idea of leaving me alone in an empty house in a bad neighborhood. But finally, I ended up convincing her. I reminded her that my uncle lived just down the street, only a 3-minute walk. I told her if anything happened, I would call him. He was reliable and always up at crazy hours. So my mum finally agreed. Around 8 p.m, my family set off with another load of boxes and headed to the new house for the night. And I was completely alone. I laid on my mattress on the floor for a while, and I distinctly remember watching Catfish for at least an hour or two. I eventually got up and took a shower and put on my pajamas. As I walked back into my room after my shower, I flicked my bedroom light on and I stopped. I heard crunching outside, distinctly the gravel on the side of the house outside of my window. I paused, trying to strain my ears to hear anything else. I began to convince myself that it was just me just trying so hard to hear something that my mind must have been playing tricks on me and making things up, and my senses were just overly heightened. I took a small step forward and What I heard next made my heart very literally stop. "The girl, she's still in there," a voice angrily whispered. I cannot describe the fear that flooded my veins with ice-cold intensity at that moment. I instantly dropped to my knees. My legs went limp with fear hearing a voice outside of my window, and it was at this point that I began to realize just how bad this situation was. I was a 19-year-old female, home completely alone at midnight, bedroom window open and no weapons. I'm sad to say, too, that I just completely froze up. But the voice spoke again, and then a second voice. There was some indistinguishable muttering and then, "Go in. Do you have it?" More talking back and forth and heated whispering, and I was sitting beneath my window with my back pressed against my bookshelf. I was trying to hide myself beneath the window that they stood at. My curtains were very sheer, and I knew that they could see in my room. They obviously quickly determined that I was still in the house. I heard crunching yet again, but this time retreating. I waited until I couldn't hear any footsteps, and I dove on my bed for my phone. I couldn't dial my uncle's number because my hands were trembling so uncontrollably. I didn't think to call 911, I know. But I knew my uncle would get to me lightning fast anyways, as his house was directly down the street. Just as I pressed the green call button to call him, I heard the front door handle jiggle. I let out a scream of pure fear, not remembering if my mum locked it behind her. I stood and I slammed my window and locked it, and I heard the door handle stop moving. It was thankfully locked. Oh dear God, it was locked. I snuck down the hall to my mum's room and peered towards the front door, and I saw a shadow walk past the front window, and then silence. My uncle picked up his phone, and I began instantly to cry and beg him to come over. He didn't ask for an explanation. He was at the door in a minute and out of breath from running. Shaking with fear and adrenaline, I told my uncle everything, and he was on high alert and promised to stay up all night in case anyone came back. My uncle also explained to me that a lot of shady characters actually stake out houses when they see moving trucks. But they know that the house will be vacant while the family is moving and try to break in and steal anything left while they see the moving trucks are gone. There's also a lot of squatters that take up surveillance on houses being moved out of so they can swoop in the second it's vacant. Judging by the fact that the two voices called me the girl, my uncle thinks that they'd been watching our house the whole time that we'd been moving things. When they saw my family leave for the night and shut the lights off, they attempted to make their move. And lucky for me, they didn't take it any further and gave up relatively quickly. Though I must admit that the fact that they knew that I was there and still attempted to try the front door, well, that still haunts me. I have an experience that I've told many people about, and honestly, no one believes me except my family. This makes me think that they've had similar experiences. They believe, too, that talking about these things somehow welcomes them in. So my family had a ranch growing up in Northern California. It's been in our family since the early 1900s. It's surrounded by forest about 100 feet away from the house. Cowboys would actually pay to take a bath on their travels and sleep in the stable at times. There's still a sign up there for the baths, in fact. And we converted that stable into a home after the original house my grandfather built burnt down in the 50s. It's very isolated, and my whole life we would just spend weekends up there. No phone, no cable, just electricity. If you got hurt or cut your hand in the wood splitter, tough luck because it's at least an hour to town. It had very basic necessities like a wood-burning stove, old appliances, pretty much everything you needed. But despite growing up there, we always carried guns, even to the bathroom that was connected to the house, but you had to go out the front door to get to it. It wasn't an outhouse, but kind of. It's hard to explain, but as kids, we always had to be in groups of 3 or 1 kid and an adult. I did have little things happen that terrified me there, but was always told to not acknowledge it. When I was 21, though, my grandfather was having a hard time staying there all weekend, and I loved it up there, so I moved in with my dog. He was a big staffy, a pit bull, and went everywhere with me in my tiny red car. I loved that car too, and this was around 2009. So my cell phone worked up there, but I had to set it on a specific shelf, and it was pretty inconsistent at times with text, but I could always call out standing on a chair by the shelf. I had a boyfriend who was an asshole. He came up every day though, but he never slept over, because it even creeped him out a bit. I would watch movies and just listen to the radio, but not having cable added to the isolation for sure. Anyway, one day it's super windy, but the power by some miracle stayed on. There was one light above the barn that barely reached my house. It had 2 front doors, one in the kitchen and one in my room on the same side of the house, about 15 to 20 feet apart. And my dogs just started going crazy at, I assume, either the wind or mountain lions. I wasn't about to let him out. The screen is kind of rattling with everything else, and then I hear it right outside of my door. I swear to you that I heard a tiny voice say, "Hello," and then pause, "Hello," pause, and louder, "Hello." The weirdest thing about this, though, is that the voice sounded really weird. It sounded like a small person, but not a child. But there was no knocking, and no response to anything I said. Just the same word over and over, but like they were trying to get it right. The yells kind of sounded like they were ours almost, and it was really weird. I was so petrified, and my dog is freaking out with his hair up. I'm calling my boyfriend, and he's on the way, but it's like an hour to get here, and everyone else loses service out here anyway. I called my grandfather, and he was mad, saying grab the gun and do not open that fucking door. I was crying and begging for it to answer me. I asked if it needed help. Does it want my phone? I was so scared that it was only saying hello and nothing else. I told it to tell me its name and that maybe I could help it, but there was nothing. Everything just felt so wrong about that situation, it's hard to describe, but I did not try and peek out the window. It was old glass, the kind that looks uneven, if that makes sense, very easily broken, but everything in my body was just telling me not to look out that window. My boyfriend eventually arrived first, and then my uncle. Before they got there, the voice became less and less vocal, and then it was just nothing. Now, there is no way a person was wandering out there. The way up to my stoop was all in mud. The stable is kind of on a small cliff, so walking to the stoop where the stairs are is uphill from the house. Plus, when we checked, there were no footprints, animal or human, in the mud. Nothing touched or taken, not even from the fridge that was outside near the bathroom area. I moved back to town not long after that, and I never slept there again. What really weirded me out about this situation, though, was the way my uncle acted. When he got there, he knew that there was nothing to be found, and he didn't ask me any questions. He told me to just keep my dog on the leash, and that was it. No one talked about it the next day except me, and I couldn't find any answers. I know that there are amazing writers out there, and I know that I am not one of them. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that I'm sorry if I can't give more precise details. A few years ago, though, I had an experience with something in my apartment, but in a completely different town and not like this. And I feel like since that happened to me, I've kind of been marked or something. I do remember being very scared of the woods growing up on that ranch, like I was always being watched. And maybe I picked up on my parents' cues, or maybe I really was being watched. I don't know. Either way, I really love that ranch, but I just don't go up there anymore. But one more thing too, despite generations of family going up there every few days to care for the property, no one has lived there full time since the house burned down, and we haven't kept animals up there either. There's no more livestock and not even a barn cat. One thing that bothered me though for a long time after this was the inflection that this thing was using, as if it was a question at first. The way it spoke, I just don't think it could say anything else, or I don't think it would have. But the voice was also kind of confident and also menacing. The cadence was way off, like it was meticulously slowing its speech to sound human. And what bothers me the most about the inflection is if it couldn't say anything else and didn't know any other language, then how did it know to phrase it in a question? I used to wonder if maybe it had seen or caught someone in the woods before and then copied its words. That's exactly what you would say if you thought you were being followed, right? Hello, hello, hello sort of thing. I don't know, but I still think about it a lot, and my heart still races remembering its voice. G'day mates, it's Busta here. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you would like to help me out, then please go ahead and watch another video by clicking on a card on the screen. As always guys, thanks for all the love and support, and I'll see you mates in the next one.